Pokémon! Uh-oh. The comment section's already not good. This franchise has had a couple of ups and downs on the Switch, and that is selling it short. But we have gone from the fixed camera angles and random encounters of the 3DS games to a full-on, open, explorable world where you battle in the environment and walk into Pokémon as you see them. We have come a long way, but there have been many bumps to getting there, and the actual result in the end may not be what we all want. However, some are better than others, and some are just free-to-play mobile games. So let's cover the 11 Pokémon games on the Switch to figure out which one is the best overall, in my opinion. Which is the definitive opinion. This may not sound right, but Game Freak had never done a Pokémon spin-off themselves before. This was their first one, Pokémon Quest, and I was actually quite excited by this, because I like all their non-Pokémon games. I love Pocket Card Jockey and Drill Dozer, and I thought, what if this is another one of those? It's not! What you're seeing here is the core of Pokémon Quest. You don't actually do anything, your Pokémon just sort of move around until they encounter Pokémon themselves and they start auto-attacking, but you can contribute by pressing more of the cooldown buttons, which allows a special attack. That's all you do. And if that's too much for you, there's an auto feature which even automates that. So this game is basically nothing. Now, maybe I'm underselling it. This is a free-to-play mobile game that found its way to Switch, and with that, there's a lot of micromanaging. When you finish levels, you get ingredients, and with those ingredients, you can cook, and when you cook, it brings more Pokemon to your base, and then you can recruit them, and then level them up. So there's a lot of other things going on behind the scenes, but does that matter when the core game is this? This was the first original Pokémon game on the Switch, and maybe back then we could have excused it as something small, it's just the debut, but God, going back, it's just nothing. This game is nothing! Here's Pokémon Cafe Remix, and make no mistake, just because this is one place higher than Quest, I don't think they're even remotely comparable. This is way better than Quest. But it's also something you've already played a billion times before. You've either played or seen other mobile games just like this. You see a bunch of icons, you've got to link them together, you get combos, you get special character-specific abilities. This game exists in so many other ways, but the aesthetic carries it forward really far. It has a very cute art style, and going back to this small cafe as a base just feels good and jolly. Speaking of presentation carrying you a long way, here's Cocomelon! Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl felt like obligations. I don't feel like they needed to exist. Apart from they sold over 15 million copies, good lord. So are these games really that bad? Well, I guess it depends on how you judge them. I think as remakes, they are very, very boring. Previous Pokémon remakes would take advancements from the series and even push it forward in some ways, whereas these ones just take so many steps back. I mean, I guess it did bring the advancements of experience share, and a genuinely good one is HMs are no longer tied to Pokemon. That is a good addition. But we just had Let's Go and Sword and Shield eradicate random encounters. Everything was overworld in those games, and suddenly we're back to where we were years ago. It doesn't do the original games justice, and it doesn't even look better than them. I mean, I guess in battle, yeah, this is probably better than a static sprite, even if it is very Cocomelon-y. But there was such a distinct vibe to the DS original, and this just feels cheap for the Switch. And I'm not one that thinks Pokemon needs to be ultra challenging, but god, this is mindlessly easy. This game was not designed for experience share, and you can make it all the way from the beginning up until the Elite Four without struggling even once. But to its credit, the post-game isn't that bad, and yes, there's barely any Platinum content, which really sucks, but there is new stuff like the Grand Underground, where you can find actual overworld encounters. Why is it only here and not in the main game? In this area you can also find legendaries from previous games, although there's no Pokemon from the future, which other remakes did. You can't suddenly bring Gen 5, 6, 7 and 8 Pokemon back to Gen 4, and that's just kinda boring. And that sums up the entire game. This is a snooze cruise that didn't need to happen, apart from selling 15 million copies. Look, I'm not a MOBA fan. I don't know what a League of Legends is, but Pokemon Unite can be kind of fun. It's cool getting to control the Pokemon one-on-one, using their moves, evolving them as the fight goes on. There is a fun back and forth to it, and the competitive scene is still going pretty strong today. It's definitely not me-coded, but I can somewhat respect it. I don't respect it a ton, but I respect it more than... Plus, some of the costumes are pretty cool. Wait, how much is that? 40 buckaroos? Well, it looks cool, but please don't buy this. Alright, we're out of the dark part of this list and onto the actual good games, Pokémon Mystery Dungeon DX. I absolutely adore the art style for this one. This cel-shaded, storybook, coloured-in look looks outstanding. And while Mystery Dungeon has always gone pretty strong, it did fall off a little bit as the series went on, so reverting back to the original was a great move. They've changed things around a bit too, with the battle system being just a bit different. And these games can either really click with you, or really just pass you by. For some people, this is one of their favourite games of all time. For me, I enjoy it. It didn't change my life, but some people swear by Mystery Dungeon. Like, to them, this is the pinnacle of all of Pokémon. And I respect that. It's just not quite there myself, but I still think this is a really cool remake. Pokémon Let's Go Eevee and Let's Go Pikachu finally gave Gen 1 the attention it deserves. This is the third remake of Gen 1, and the fifth time we've returned to Kanto. I actually do really like this game, especially in retrospect. Like, when this released, it was the only mainline Pokémon game on Switch, and in that respect, it was pretty disappointing. The multiplayer is really limited, leaving this with a rather short shelf life after you've caught them all, but for everything it doesn't do, it does a ton of other stuff really well. I think this is the best looking mainline Pokémon game for one. I mean, yeah, it's simple and tile-based, but it has a strong aesthetic and really good lighting. You can also play the entire game co-op, which is really cool for playing with kids or a partner or a friend or whatever. The music is absolutely delightful, the highest quality of any Pokémon game on the Switch somehow. It's all orchestrated, and they never did that again for some reason. Shiny hunting's really fun, and I've never really enjoyed shiny hunting, and every single Pokémon can either follow you, or you can ride on them. And with some flying types, you can just fly over load zones sometimes. It's really, really cool, just riding full speed on an Arcanine. Now, like Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, it definitely doesn't do everything a remake could do, but I do think this is way more distinct. And plus, it gave us overworld encounters for the first time in a Pokémon game, and this is now a mainstay of the entire series. Now for the first original mainline game, Pokémon Sword and Shield. I think these are mostly good games. The Galar region's a really good setting with brilliant colours, lots of variety, and the new Pokémon are all really good, especially Wooloo. Character designs too, they really stepped their game up. Sword and Shield sits as a middle ground title. It is still finding its footing to the future. Half of the game is more in this sort of 3DS-y locked camera environments, so the towns are locked cameras, the routes have locked cameras, but then there's the wild area, which allows you to finally use that pesky right analog stick. And while it's not particularly pretty in the wild area, they were definitely onto something. It was cool roaming around in the early game and finding a Pokémon 40 levels above you that you can't possibly catch and you've got to run away from. That almost felt like a less intimidating Xenoblade. The wild area definitely wasn't that expansive. It was more so just a big field, kind of like the Ocarina of Time field. However, the DLCs would go further, making bigger wild areas with kind of towns in them and different subsections. While the wild area was flawed, it definitely felt like this was the future of Pokémon, and it was genuinely fun to walk around and catch Pokémon here. The actual routes and caves though, they were all pretty basic, especially the caves. You can just kind of walk through them and have no real intimidation like previous Pokémon games. It was definitely a mixed bag of a game, but the competitive side was genuinely really good. Definitely not perfect games, far from it, but they did grow the series. Oh, I hate that. I'm going to keep it in there. This is the character select screen for Pokkén on Wii U. It's disgraceful. What are these empty spaces? Well, while the arcade version kept getting more and more characters, the Wii U version was simply never updated. And so when Pokkén finally came to the Switch, oh, look at this majesty! There's still one empty space. Pokkén on Wii U had 16 characters, whereas Pokkén on the Switch has 25. In many ways, this is a half sequel to that game. And that's a really good thing, because Pokkén is one of my favourite Pokémon spin-offs of all time. I've always wanted a Pokémon fighting game, and this is it. There's two different styles of fighting here. There's 3D and there's 2D. And if you hit someone so hard, you just flip the perspective. And it feels really good to sort of merge between those styles so seamlessly. And what's awesome too is for a game from 2017, there's still people playing online today. There's a really good selection of characters, some great stages, some awesome music, and there's even some Tekken moves in here because this is technically a Tekken crossover. In Germany, it's called Pokémon Tekken because I think the word Pokkén means something else over there. Yeah, it means smallpox. Oh dear. Now, I will admit, the single player is not very good, but if you take this as just a competitive multiplayer fighter, then this is one of the best things that Pokémon has ever done. If they ever do a full-fledged Pokkén 2, I will be there day one. Now for the latest games in the series, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, some pretty controversial ones too. I will say this, Pokémon on the Switch has very distinct mainline games. We've got Let's Go, which is very different. We've got Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, very traditional and boring. We've got Sword and Shield, which kind of has that middle ground, and then we've got Scarlet and Violet, which is full-on 3D games. There's no more distinction between towns and routes and wild areas and even Pokémon battles. It all just takes place in one single area, and that is a brilliant path forward. I had more fun with Scarlet and Violet than any mainline game in years. With it being fully open too, the objective's kind of different. It's not just going from town to town, gym to gym. You can go where you want, when you want. And there's now multiple main objectives. It's not just doing gyms. This feels far freer, more open than any Pokémon game has in the past. But it comes at the expense of being butt ugly. Pokémon games on the Switch have been slowly expanding and getting more ambitious, but the tech, their engine powering these games, is not growing alongside it. So they are gradually getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's also getting messier and messier and messier. The camera is going to be clipping through the environment all the time, the frame rate's going to go down, the image quality's not going to look very good. Some people can't look past all that, and I do not blame them. The textures in this game frankly look awful. But it definitely is offset for me by how fun the game is. And the multiplayer's grown exponentially too. It's not just battling and trading, you can go around the entire world together, and it's just so chill getting 4 friends and just playing Pokémon in tandem. If they can finally get past all their tech issues in the next game, then Pokémon will actually be high quality. The potential is here, this game is fun, this game's really fun, but behind all that fun is just a mess. We should definitely expect more from the biggest franchise in gaming, but for what it is, Scarlet and Violet are good, in my opinion. But what's better? The game that came out a few months prior, the other Gen 4 remake, and the one that I think was the only one that needed to exist, Pokémon Legends Arceus. This was a complete reimagining of Pokémon. It's still technically a mainline game, but they've rethought so many fundamentals of what Pokémon is, and they weren't afraid to push the boat forward to try and do new things. Like Let's Go, they've de-emphasized the multiplayer, and this is purely a single-player game. And my favorite part about it is how seamless it is. Coming from Sword and Shield and Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which had all these battle transitions and loading screens and menus, look at what Legends does. You can just throw out a Pokeball and battle in the world. And once the fight is done, it doesn't transition to a menu screen, it just shows you a little bit in the corner and you're still playing. You can just look at all that in the corner and continue on going. The pacing of Legends is exactly what I want the big mainline games to be, and Scarlet and Violet had some of it, but not all of it. And of course the big differentiator for Legends is this is set in the past before Pokemon and humans were friends, and so the Pokemon actually attack you as a player. They feel dangerous and intimidating in a way that only expanded Pokemon media has touched upon. The mainline games have never done this before. You'll be diving out of the way of Pokemon with these big raging eyes, and some creatures that were never intimidating in the past are suddenly quite scary. But it's more than just that. The human player has more of a role than ever. You can actually throw and aim Pokeballs in real time. And that may sound like too much of a deviation of what Pokemon catching is, but the way it's balanced around this rapid catching really works. But it's also really intimidating if you fail, because if it's a really strong Pokemon and you're not hiding in a bush somewhere, they're going to come straight after you. And even the battle system is quite a bit different. It's a bit more like Final Fantasy X in this one. You can go between these strong and quick moves, and because the pacing is much faster, sometimes that strong move is enough just to finish the battle, but other times you've got to be strategic about when you do that. Still, this game is not perfect. Technically, it's still being held together by sticks and glue. But more than any other Pokemon game on Switch, it is easier to overlook this because of how fun and different it is. I really want more of Legends to make its way into the future. And while yes, it may not look very good all the time, the art style is actually quite nice, and the skyboxes are magnificent. What happened here? How does everything else look so mundane but the skyboxes are just masterful? So, if you've been keeping track, we've now covered every single mainline Pokemon game, but we're not at number 1 yet, so what could possibly have the top spot? New Pokémon Snap, baby! I never thought this would happen. We had been asking for this game for years. When the Wii finally had motion controls, we thought, this is perfect, but no. When the 3DS had a camera, we thought, this is perfect, but no. When the Wii U gamepad was practically a camera, we thought, this is perfect, but no. Finally though, on the Switch, Pokémon Snap had caught up to 8 generations of Pokémon, and we get to see them in a way that we never do. Finally, they are actual creatures living their lives in these environments. In the games, they're just tools for battle, but you fully get to see what they are and their personalities in Pokémon Snap. And they kept going further and further with the concept. The original game was so fun because you could master it. You can learn how to get the best pictures, how to trigger the best animations. But new Pokémon Snap has so many optional things to do. Almost every level has a daytime and a nighttime version with different routes as well. But also every single Pokémon has 4 different stages of picture for you to catalog. And that's not just 4 different poses. You basically got a 1-star, a 2-star, a 3-star, and a 4-star state. But there's many different poses that capture all those states. So if you're going for 100% completion, there is a ton to do in this game. It's not just a one and done thing. My partner has played this game for like 100 hours. And it looks absolutely incredible too. I especially love this underwater level. This looks really, really good. You get to see Pokemon interacting with each other, there's all these legendary Pokemon, and it's just packed with secrets. Some of them are pretty obscure too, just triggering them can be quite a puzzle in itself. And then they said, let's just give them some free DLC for no reason. I would have paid for this stuff, but they gave you like 3 extra stages. And one of them is really reminiscent of a stage from the original Pokémon Snap. This game just encapsulates what it is to be a Pokémon fan. There have definitely been times in my life where my love for Pokémon has waned, but new Pokémon Snap reminds me why I even love this franchise in the first place. It's so full of love and care and detail, and I hope it doesn't take another 2 decades to get another one, because new Pokémon Snap is frankly the best Pokémon game in, I don't even know how long, a very long time. That's right, baby. New Pokémon Snap is the best Switch Pokémon game and the best Pokémon game in a long time. And I do not regret that one bit. I'm sure there's going to be a few people being like, you think the photography game is better than Pokémon Brilliant Diamond? And yes, I very much do. I think the entire franchise could learn so much from new Pokémon Snap. But let me know what you think. What's your ranking of the Switch Pokémon games? Do you completely disagree with me? Or are you in complete agreement? Is your list the exact same? Let me know, and I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.